IT systems around the globe are under siege from an ever-increasing array of advanced targeted threats, and traditional approaches to network security are less effective at stopping them. What are the biggest obstacles to endpoint security today? Why do traditional solutions often fail to meet the challenge? And why are more and more enterprises turning to a defense-in-depth approach to network security? In this program, we'll explore these questions and more with two of the top experts on network security, Gartner Vice President and Research Fellow Neil MacDonald, and Lumension Chairman and CEO Patrick Clawson. They'll reveal the best ways for you to keep your network safe and help you determine the right approach for your security needs.
There's several obstacles to effective endpoint security today. The biggest has to be addressing the threat of advanced targeted attacks that bypass traditional signature-based mechanisms. So traditional signature-based anti-malware solutions depend on someone else having seen it, so you have a signature to protect yourself. And when no one else in the world has seen it, because the hackers are targeting you and your intellectual property only, no one else has the signature, therefore you don't have it either. So that's the single biggest challenge. How do we protect ourselves from these advanced targeted attacks, also referred to as advanced persistent threats? Number two, before we go out and buy new solutions for protecting our endpoints, we have to get the basics right. And I discuss this with clients. We have to go back and look at the basic machine configuration. Are we setting configuration standards? Are we monitoring for adherence to those standards? But more importantly, patching. Most people say, well, I've done patching. Patching's complete. And I'll point out, well, yeah, you're probably patching Windows and Office, which is very important, but the hackers are smart. They look for things you aren't patching that are on many machines. Things like Adobe Reader with PDFs or Java virtual machines. These are very common targets for attack. So we have to go beyond just patching Windows and Office. The third major challenge to endpoint security today is mobile devices, especially ones brought in through consumerization, employees bringing in their own device, and they want to connect it to our network. And that challenges traditional endpoint security models because we don't own and don't control the device. If you consider the challenges of securing endpoints today, it really changes the requirements of what we expect out of our endpoint protection solutions. And in fact, in Gartner research, we don't call this antivirus protection any longer. We call these endpoint protection platforms. And we use that word platform very specifically because we cannot be solely reliant on signature-based anti-malware protection any longer. So the number one requirement from the vendors should be, what are you doing in addition to signatures? How else are you protecting me? What else is in this platform that's going to protect me from these advanced targeted attacks and these advanced persistent threats? So for example, sure, anti-malware is going to be in there. What about a firewall? What about host intrusion prevention capabilities? What about behavioral monitoring? What about application control and whitelisting? What about device control? What about things like security configuration management or even patch management? We should be looking at a system, not just siloed solutions. An endpoint protection platform should combine all of these protection mechanisms as a system that work together to provide better protection. That's the key. So when you look at the different vendors, yes, things like a management console and setting consistent policy, these are very important, but number one on the list has to be, how do these different components work together to protect me as a system so I am not solely reliant on signature-based protection mechanisms? So the question of should I use a whitelisting application control-based approach or should I use a blacklisting signature-based approach, the question is wrong. The answer is actually both. Most use cases, when you look at desktop users, when you have end users that download and install and execute arbitrary code, you need both whitelisting and blacklisting based techniques to protect your endpoint. That's why we call it an endpoint protection platform. Multiple styles of protection, whitelisting and blacklisting working together as a system to provide overall improved protection. Now, there are some ways they actually can work better together. So, for example, if you know a file is from a high assurance source, say it's from Microsoft, why do I need to scan that for viruses with blacklisting? So certainly you can come up with scenarios where using whitelisting-based techniques and having an understanding of what's good and high assurance on your system can then reduce the amount of time that you actually have to spend scanning with blacklisting-based approaches. So that's a great example of how these can work better together as a system. So the idea that it has to be one or the other, that's actually wrong. The answer is both for most desktops. Protecting servers has a fundamentally different strategy than protecting desktops. On desktops, we have users that download and install arbitrary code, and that creates problems, and that's why we complement whitelisting with blacklisting. Servers, different story. Servers, for the most part, lead very boring lives. They kind of sit there and they do one thing. I do Exchange, I do SharePoint, I do SQL, and we can use that to our advantage. If all they're supposed to be running is one or two things, then a whitelisting-based, application control-based solution makes a great deal of sense. If you're only supposed to be doing these few things, then only do that. Don't do anything else. And that simple concept, especially on a server, prevents, by definition, all malware. Now, it also prevents operations folks from making arbitrary changes. So the foundation of server protection actually is rooted in change control, privilege management, restricted physical access. That should be the foundation of your server protection strategy. Then on top of that, configuration management and vulnerability management, making sure it's configured securely and patched correctly. And then I would say application control and whitelisting would be the next layer in this strategy, long before you get to antivirus and anti-malware protection. And in fact, on a well-managed server, you don't need AV. You don't need traditional anti-malware-based scanning. It provides little or no value, unless it's a general-purpose file server. But a well-managed server that is protected with foundational capabilities rooted in operations hygiene, supplemented with whitelisting, is a very well-protected server, and in most cases, the anti-malware protection adds little value. The top inquiries from clients that I'm getting regarding endpoint security are, number one, the migration to Windows 7. And using the migration to Windows 7 as a catalyst to improve security, usually in one of two ways. Either they're looking at removing administrator rights from their users and running them as a standard user, and they're also looking at application control and whitelisting-based approaches. And they're using the migration to Windows 7 as a catalyst to make that change happen. And that is a best practice. Regarding application control and whitelisting, the calls I'm getting around that are, can it really work? Can it scale? Does it really work on desktops? It works well on servers, but does it really work on desktops? And I'll point these clients to consider iOS, Apple's operating system that's used on the iPad and the iPhone. It is fundamentally a whitelisting-based approach. It's a whitelist where Apple is the curator of the list through the Apple App Store. So by definition, it's a form of whitelisting. It's implicit whitelisting. And of course, users run as standard user. They typically don't have root access to their phones, but they don't feel like they're trapped. In fact, they feel like they've got a lot of choice. And what we need to successful in application control deployments is to replicate that model in a Windows environment. Can we allow users to have some flexibility, some choice without locking them down? That's the second area of discussion. The third relates to virtualization in the data center and how that affects anti-malware scanning and security protection in general. What do they need to do differently as they're virtualizing servers, as they're virtualizing desktops, and how does that impact their choice of vendors, and how will that impact performance and I/O in a virtualized environment? Those are the top three concerns. Mobile device management is one of the significant areas of concern from clients, and it's another area that the vendors are working to address. Here's the issue with mobile device management. On one hand, we've got our mobile workforce. They want anywhere, anytime access. And oh, by the way, they want it on their device, that whole trend towards consumerization. Together, this creates an incredibly difficult environment to secure, at least using traditional methods. That's where the mobile device management vendors come in. Now, there are a variety of solutions that range from the very simple to the very complex. The more complex solutions look at things like device provisioning, billing, network provisioning, application provisioning, as well as security configuration and policy management. So these are very robust MDM platforms. Other vendors focus on very simple solutions, and that's where most organizations start. Can I enforce basic security policy? For example, is the device password protected? Is the device encrypted? Has it been jailbroken? And I can enforce these policies, and I can use these policies then to allow access to things like corporate email. So there's a variety of solutions in the MDM spectrum, ranging from very simple to very complex. Most organizations are starting here. Can I enforce these basic security policies before I allow the devices to connect to my enterprise assets? The most important best practice when you're looking at application control and whitelisting is to not underestimate the issues associated with culture and politics. If you have end users that for years have been running something like Windows XP, they run as administrators, they can install and run anything they want, and now you show up saying, well, no, you're going to only run the things that I say you can run, which is this whitelisting-based approach. That's night and day. And unless the users are prepared for this, or unless you have executive buy-in as to why this is taking place, this project will not be successful. So do not underestimate the complaints that users will have as you start to exert more control over their environment. Now, it's not lockdown, and that's another best practice. Don't call it lockdown. It's a more controlled environment, which leads into another best practice, which is deciding whether or not you're doing this for operational benefits or are you doing it for security benefits. So for example, from an operational perspective, you might say, well, I want to reduce the number of images that I have to support, so that saves money. Or I want to reduce the number of help desk calls, well, that saves money. Those are operational benefits, and that could be the reason that you're exerting more control over the environment. Or it might be security related. I want to keep malware off the machine. Now, these are both very valid points of view, but you need to decide which one takes precedence, because it does, at the end of the day, start dictating how tightly you lock down the environment, or how tightly you exert control over the environment, and which goals we're trying to achieve here. And we can achieve both, but we need to decide which one takes priority. Another best practice is understanding that change will happen, especially at end-user desktops. As compared to servers, servers are relatively static. End-user environments change. People need new versions of applications. That has to be factored into whatever application control and whitelisting solution that you choose. End users also want new applications, applications that weren't previously on the list. So you have to decide how you're going to define your exception process. When they want to run an application and they can't because it's not on the whitelist, who do they call? What's the workflow that's set in motion? Does it have to be approved? Does it go to the help desk? And are you staffed for this potential increase in help desk calls for people asking for exceptions? Another best practice leads right out of that. When someone asks for an exception to run application abc.exe, how do you know if it's evil or not? How do you know if it's malware or not? What tools do the help desks have to make that decision? So another best practice is to supplement your view of the world with cloud-based file reputation services. Can I ask a vendor or a solution provider, have you seen this file? Have you seen abc.exe? Has anyone else in the world seen abc.exe? And is it known to be good or is it known to be bad? And use that as a factor in your decision making. So I do not believe you can solve all of these problems yourself, and you need to supplement as a best practice with cloud-based file reputation services. And finally, don't assume one size fits all. There are different users, different use cases, there'll be different levels of control. So a best practice would be, let's start with the users that have fixed desktops with well-defined work usage patterns. Something like a call center, for example. Very well-defined, the work that they perform, it's a well-defined application set. It doesn't change as much as other use cases, so let's start with those and get some successes under our belt. Also, don't forget about servers. We talked about them earlier. Servers lead very boring lives. Let's apply whitelisting and application control there first. That's much, much easier to look at environments where change is less frequent. Then we'll start looking at the more complex usage scenarios. But do not assume one size fits all, and stage and phase how you roll out application control and whitelisting to the more well-defined use cases first.
Lumension as a company is a group of people that have brought several different point solution technologies together. So an amalgamation of what was traditionally a group of point technologies bought around the world. But we did it with the intent of building a next generation platform of technologies. So first of all, there's an architectural benefit to who we are and what we do. First of all, we have integrated 7 different technologies into a single agent, single server, single user interface platform. On top of that, we're also a company that sits on about 4,500 government enterprise customers around the world, protecting them with a group of best-of-breed technologies, from patch remediation to device control to antivirus to the world's largest whitelisting provider. So we are an amalgamation of a series of technologies that put a stake in the ground about getting next generation, about incorporating new technologies to help protect our endpoint customers around the world and the data that resided on their devices in a new way. So the primary things that we're hearing from our customers that keep them up at night right now it's an interesting bag. So we have some very big subjects that people talk a lot about. We hear about cloud, we hear about mobility, and we hear about virtualization. And those on their own all represent interesting new risks in the environment. And how do you secure your data in the environment when you're trying to deploy these technologies? At the same time, we've also seen an increased number of attacks, and those that are very, very targeted. Ones where your traditional security technologies won't suffice, where the signature-based approaches can't stop something because they've never been seen before. So we have this blended issue where something that people have been comfortable with for many years, things like antivirus or other signature-based technologies, are kind of running out of their ability to protect you as they had in the past. And on top of that, we've got new forms of technology coming into our business, such as cloud computing and mobile device, et cetera. And our business customers are trying desperately to figure out, how do we protect the data when it's floating from our internal laptops and desktops off to cloud technologies? What about our customers being an employee who brings in their own mobile device, yet our sensitive data is on that device? And then virtualization. We as an entity, we have a virtual environment and we have a physical environment. Do we have to protect our technologies differently? Do we have to give up on our security practices in order to deploy virtualization technology? So there's the 3 big buzzwords we hear a lot about, but all of those are wrapped in a much more complex situation, which is The attack landscape is big. It can be exceptionally targeted nowadays, where it had not always been in the past. And the technologies that we've spent millions on, which are largely signature-based, can't help protect us in those environments. The value of an endpoint protection suite, or a platform, as you will hear a lot about today, as opposed to their predecessors, which were a bunch of standalone endpoint protection technologies, is that when they're built correctly, they are fully integrated into an environment where you have a single agent, not a bunch of old historical technology that's bolted together. You have a single server, a single user interface with fully integrated workflows across your multiple technologies. And the important thing here, and I've heard others say this before, is that the technologies that reside on that platform or that suite are intelligent and they work together. And I want to emphasize how important it is in a larger enterprise for somebody who has a requirement to run an antivirus technology, for that policy for your AV technology to understand your patching technology and what its policies may be by user or by machine, or your whitelisting application control policies, or even your device usage policies. So when these things are fully integrated and working harmoniously, the byproduct of which, the benefit of which, is that our actual end user customers will be able to start to benefit from a reduced cost structure. They're not manhandling the policies across different technologies. They may look pretty in a common bundle, but maybe they're not so integrated. So we look to real world savings. We look at fewer gaps within the security infrastructure itself because the technologies understand each other. And generally a happier user base because it's less intrusive on them as well. So platforms, suites today, the benefits is that we're bringing technologies together both architecturally and operationally to deliver a much more secure enterprise and one that costs less to run. Let's take a look at how a couple of our customers have benefited from the DefenseNDepth approach that we talk so much about today. So on the platform, I'll use a customer, which is a healthcare customer in the Midwest, about 12,000, 13,000 nodes that we manage in their environment. And as we have begun to integrate additional technologies onto the platform, they have put themselves in a position of trying to dramatically reduce the number of threat outbreaks or malware incidents that they're exposed to or having to react to on a weekly basis. So some of the things that they're able to take advantage of in our platform would be, they've been a historical patch customer, so they try to keep up to date, they try to plug the holes, they try to stay as close to the 0-day window as possible, and they're really good at it. They've traditionally been doing antivirus, and then more recently they've tried to incorporate the intelligent whitelisting technology from Lumension, or as a lot of people would know it is application whitelisting or app control. So what they've been able to do here is by leveraging the whitelisting technology and the antivirus technology on the same agent, and where the policies actually understand each other, they've been able to distribute those across their laptops, desktops, and servers. They've been able to take certain technologies and whitelist them so that those technologies, which are fairly boring, they sit in a data center, or they're not in an environment where they need to be modified or changed very often, they whitelisted those. And in whitelisting them, they eliminate the risk of malware being written to them, because nothing can write to the hard drive that's outside of your known good list. And then on the other side, they deploy your traditional antivirus, or sometimes both technologies running on the same devices. So I have an example of a healthcare customer who's been able to deploy all of our technology on the suite, but the two things working well together, being the application control and the antivirus, have put them in a position of no longer having to respond to 2 to 3 serious outbreaks a week, down to 0 a week. So there's a real benefit, and that benefit is not only a security-related benefit, it's an operational cost benefit within that enterprise. So that's one example. I think the other primary example that we like to talk a lot about is today there are economies when you invest in a single platform where a lot of technologies are nicely integrated. So what we've been able to provide our customers, not just from a security perspective, tightening the gap, are we patched? Do we have the right AV signatures out there? Are we whitelisting where and when we can to eliminate risk where and when we don't want to ever accept it? Do we device control by user and maybe by machine within an enterprise? But you're also some serious economics that come together when you're able to invest all of that within a single provider. So from an end user perspective or a customer, we have a large banking customer in the UK who went and bought all of our technology. They literally eliminated 5 other point solution vendors for device control, for antivirus, for patch and remediation, for power management, etc. So from an operational perspective, they were able to reduce 5 separate sets of technology, the user interfaces, the disenfranchised policies that existed within those, all the server and operating system costs that went with it, and focus on one leading provider. Again, cost. The advantage of partnering with Lumension is, I would cover it in probably 3 or 4 different areas. One, we're exceptionally passionate about this industry. It would have been very easy for us to remain a patch company forever and just do that really well. But when we got together as a company, as a management team, we tried to look to the future. We tried to understand the information and data security problems that were coming our way. We saw that your traditional signature-based or behavioral-based technologies couldn't stop things that were very targeted. And we knew that somehow or another, by blending these technologies and giving the customer a choice of how and when and where to use the technology, as long as it was not obtrusive, as long as it didn't require a bunch of different agents to be deployed and a whole bunch of different user interfaces to be managed with a bunch of different people in your enterprise, that you could do something different. You really could make a difference in the information security landscape. So as a company, we're passionate about having tried to see the future and try to build a series of technologies and integrate technologies to be there before anybody else was. So there's an innovative element to what we do. The other thing that I think is unique about us is we desperately try to stay best of breed in everything that we do. We are the world's largest patch remediation vendor. We are the world's largest device control vendor with removable media encryption. We are the world's largest whitelisting vendor. We take this very seriously. We are not in a position of trying to give up capabilities in order to fit everything onto a platform. When we come to you, we want you to say, you know what, I'm getting best of breed here. I'm getting the best patch solution that's available to me in the world and the best whitelisting solution that's available to me in the world, et cetera. So there are a few things. On top of that, look, we're dynamic. We are ever changing. We are trying to bring new technologies on platform to answer our customers' needs. And I think that's another very compelling argument. We aren't burdened by giant corporate infrastructure that doesn't allow us to react quickly to our customers' needs and wants. I think the very last thing is our customer experience environment is unbelievable. We focus hard on doing it differently, trying to be the best of the best, trying to get our customers to tell 2 people every time they hang up the phone with us about what a great experience they had dealing with Lumension. So several different points there: the innovation, the responsiveness, your ability to go out there and see what's happening in the world and get it done, and lastly, the post-sale customer experience and how reactive we are to our customers and how helpful.